The first thing I recommend buying is a set of flat and filbert brushes. Flat brushes look like this, or you can buy them at an angle like this, and filbert brushes look like this. They have round brushes, so they're really great for painting round objects. And I typically use the brands Craftsmart and Artist Loft because those are the cheapest that I could find. Keep in mind, I consider myself an advanced painter and I still use the cheaper ones more than the expensive ones because I think they work really great. If you do want to splurge on some expensive brushes though, I also really love the brands Zen Line by Royal Langnickel and Princeton Art and Brush Co. These look and feel more luxurious than the cheaper ones, and they also fray less in my experience. And there's not a specific set of brushes that I recommend, so I recommend just going into your local art store and picking up whatever looks best to you. A similar but slightly different option is these long flat and filbert brushes by Royal and Langnickel. These have similar sized bristles to the other brushes I just shared, but the handles are much longer. And the reason I love these is because you can hold them further away from the bristles, which allows you to get looser brush strokes. So if you want to break away from that super perfect look and get more of an impressionistic style, I highly recommend these. The next type of brush I recommend getting are these extra wide 3-inch flat brushes. And I don't think you need to buy them immediately, but they do really come in handy once you start painting on larger surfaces. And I recommend you buy at least 3. One for gessoing, one for painting, and one for varnishing, and I'll explain what that means later in the video. And I use this brand MAC, but I don't specifically recommend this brush because it leaves really harsh paint strokes and the hairs tend to fall out super easily. So if you can get something a little bit softer, I think that would be better, but otherwise these are okay. The next type of brush I recommend are these miniature round brushes. You can buy larger round brushes as well, but I literally never use those. The main purpose of these miniature ones is to add fine detail at the end, and I also use them to sign my name. And even though I like to use affordable brushes for the most part, I actually do tend to splurge on the more high-end brushes for this category. And the reason why is because I want my details to look really fine and sharp, and it's pretty hard to get those results with cheap brushes that fray after just a few uses. Here's a side-by-side comparison to show you what I mean. I used the cheaper one on the left just a few times and it's already very frayed, versus this Vienna brush by Artist Loft that I've been using for several years is only a little bit frayed. If you do want to use the more affordable option though, I would recommend cutting the little flyaway hairs once in a while and using a little bit of soap to hold the bristles together. The next category of brushes is completely optional. I honestly don't think you need any of these, but I wanted to mention them just in case you want to experiment. Number 1 is a fan brush. They look like this and they're really great for painting trees. Number 2 is special effect brushes, which can make really unique textures and patterns. Number 3 is sponges. And there are a wide variety of textures for sponges, so I'm not going to recommend a specific one. You can just pick out whatever texture looks best to you. And you can also use random materials to paint, like sticks, leaves, orange peels, etc. Just make sure you dispose of them carefully after you're done. And if you want a separate video on non-traditional painting materials, let me know because I'd be really happy to make that for you. For paint brands, I'm going to go in order from most affordable to most high-end. So the first brand of paint I actually don't use in my painting practice anymore, but I did when I was first learning how to paint. It's these super cheap little bottles from Michaels, and they come in a ton of different colors, so you don't even need to learn color theory if you don't want to. I recommend these if you are just doing painting as a casual hobby and you want to spend as little money as possible. I also think these are great for painting in sketchbooks or just hosting a painting party. Or if you need a little bit of a unique color like silver and you don't want to buy a big bottle, you can just buy one of these. At some point, I do recommend splurging on more high quality paint. High quality paint tends to look better in terms of colors and textures, and it also tends to last longer. So if you want your paintings to last a lifetime or beyond, it's important to invest in the right paint. And the next brand I'm going to recommend is not the most high-end, but it is a good middle ground for those of you who are still on a budget. It is these Liquitex Basic Acrylic paints, and they come in a wide variety of colors. It also has a really thick texture, so keep that in mind as well. This is the paint that I would recommend to most people because it's not outrageously expensive and it does a really good job. It's also the paint that I use in my personal practice. The next brand of paint I'm going to recommend is a lot pricier, so I wouldn't recommend it if you're on a budget. But if you do have the extra money to spend, I think these are absolutely amazing. It's these little 1-ounce bottles by Golden. These are really pigmented and they have really beautiful colors, so I highly recommend them. And if you like abstract or non-objective painting, I also think these work really great for that. The thing with non-objective painting is the paint itself is the subject, so you want to invest in really high quality paint. The texture of these is a little bit thin, so I do like to mix them with mediums in order to thicken them up a little bit. And mixing them with mediums also makes them last longer, so it's kind of a win-win. I also think these are really great if you want to display your work in a gallery or sell them for a really high price. But if you're just selling them to friends and family for a really low price, then I don't think it's as worth it. If you want your paint to be thicker without having to mix it with any type of medium, they also have these tubes, which I think are great. If you're on a really tight budget and you can only afford to buy 2 colors, I recommend starting out with black and white. Or you can do white and whatever your favorite color is. It might sound boring, but I absolutely love monochromatic paintings and I paint them all the time. But for most people, I recommend starting out with 4 to 5 colors, and those colors are red, blue, yellow, white, and maybe black. I actually have a rule where I never use black in my landscape paintings because they just don't mix well with other colors. What I do instead is I take red, blue, and a little bit of yellow to make a chromatic black. But I do love to use black in my black and white paintings, so I still love having it on hand. The shade of black I use is Mars Black, and the shade of white I use is Titanium White. As for the primary colors though, you have to decide whether you prefer warm tones or cool tones. I actually own both a warm tone and a cool tone for each primary color, but I recommend starting out with just one or the other. And if you're on the fence, I would say go with warm tones. For warm colors, I use Cadmium Red Deep Hue, Cadmium Yellow Deep Hue, and Thylocyanine Blue. And for cool colors, I use Primary Red, Primary Yellow, and Ultramarine Blue. And if you buy these 4 to 5 colors, you can get pretty much all the colors of the rainbow. If you do want to buy tertiary colors like lavender and teal, you can, but your paintings are honestly going to look a lot more cohesive if you mix all of your colors yourself. And there are a few colors that you can't get from these combinations, like silver, gold, and any type of neon color, but I recommend buying those as needed instead of buying them right away. When it comes to painting surfaces, the most popular option is canvases, and that's for a good reason. Canvases have canvas cloth stretched over wooden frames, and that tension is really important because it provides a little bit of bounce when you paint on it. I personally don't mind the more affordable ones, but the more high-end ones are a little bit sturdier, so just consider that. But my personal favorite preference is making my own canvases when I'm able to. I don't have access to a wood shop right now, but if I did, I would be making my own canvases all the time. It's so much more fun and you get really high-end results for a very low price. I don't think it's as worth it if you're making smaller canvases, but larger canvases can run over $100, so in that case, 1 hour of time is definitely worth the money. One thing to consider though is if you do make your own canvases, you're going to have to gesso it yourself. The store-bought canvases come pre-gessoed. The next option is canvas boards. These have the same texture as a regular canvas, but they're on cardboard. You're not going to get the same bounciness that you get with a regular canvas, but since they're much thinner, it makes them a lot easier to store, and it's also a little bit easier to ship in my experience. The next option is a sketchbook, but please don't buy a regular sketchbook because the pages will be much too thin to carry the paint. I would recommend something like a watercolor sketchbook instead. I personally don't like using sketchbooks either way, but I know a lot of people love them, so I would definitely recommend trying it out. The next option for painting surfaces is wood. You can find sheets of MDF wood for very affordable prices at your local hardware store. You will need to gesso them though, so it does take a little bit of extra preparation. It also feels a little bit different than canvas because it doesn't have that same waffle material, but it's not bad, just different. And adding on to the category of wood, you can also go to your local craft store and find these cute little wooden sculptures to paint on, and that can be a really fun way to switch things up. I also like giving these wooden sculptures away to friends as little presents. Other than paint, brushes, and canvases, the first thing I recommend buying is a palette knife. These are used to mix different paints together to get custom colors. I highly recommend getting one of these because they're very expensive and you're actually saving a lot of money in the long run. You want to avoid using your brushes to mix the paint because not only do you waste a lot of paint that way, but you also potentially ruin your brushes. The other nice thing about these is you can use them instead of brushes and spread the paint on canvas like butter on toast. I'll insert a picture of a painting that I made using this technique because it looks really cool and it was really fun. The next thing you might want to buy is a palette. I recommend either getting a plastic or a glass palette depending on how clumsy you are. I would also recommend getting a flat surface rather than the ones with dips in them because a flat surface is easier to mix with the palette knife. If you don't want to spend money on a palette though, that's totally fine. You can instead use a picture frame if it's empty and just mix paint on top of that glass, or you can use a paper plate if it has that glossy film on it. The next thing you might want to buy is varnish. This helps protect your paintings after you finish it, and it also makes it look extra beautiful. You don't need it if you're just practicing painting, but once you start making pieces that you really love, this will help take your paintings to the next level. The main question you want to ask yourself is, do you want to buy high gloss, medium gloss, or matte varnish? The next thing you might want to buy is gesso. This helps prime your paintings so that the paint doesn't bleed into the painting surface. Whether or not you need to buy it though depends on what painting surfaces you're using. If you're using canvas or canvas board, these already come pre-gessoed, so you don't need to gesso it yourself. If you're using wood or making your own canvases though, you do need to gesso it yourself. The next thing you might want to buy are painting mediums. I don't recommend this if you're just starting out or if you're using the super cheap paint, but at some point I do recommend buying them because they are really fun experimenting with and they can have a really big impact on the texture of your painting. There are a ton of different mediums, so I'm not going to list all of them, but some examples are high gloss, matte, modeling paste, and gel. Under this category, I also want to talk about slow dry mediums and retarder. One thing you need to know about acrylic paint is that it dries very fast, almost as soon as you put it down on the canvas. A lot of people don't like this, so they compensate by adding slow dry medium or retarder. If you're debating which one to get, I recommend slow dry medium because it interferes less with the color and texture of the painting. Both are fine though. Personally though, I don't use either one of these because I like to paint super fast. The biggest thing you might want to buy is an easel, but please make sure you love painting and want to continue doing it for a long time before you invest in such a big purchase. Some easels can also take up a lot of space, so you want to take that into consideration as well. You definitely don't need an easel in the beginning because you can also paint at your desk or paint on the floor. But easels can help prevent back pain and allow you to hold your brushes at better angles, so I definitely recommend getting one at some point if you can afford it and if you're going to be painting a lot. There are many different options for easels that you can buy, so I'm not going to go over all of them, but some questions you can ask yourself are: do you want wood or metal, indoor or outdoor, foldable or non-foldable, and storage or no storage.